Hey guys, tonight we step into a world of boiling pots, thick stews, and a breakfast that looks suspiciously like last night's leftovers, because it is last night's leftovers. You're about to enter a smoky, timber-framed kitchen where strange smells drift from hanging pots. The fire's been burning since dawn, and what's considered a fine meal might leave your modern stomach second-guessing everything. But don't worry, this culinary adventure is oddly soothing. There's something comforting about learning that even in the mess and madness of medieval mealtimes, some things haven't really changed at all. You won't believe what passed for a hearty morning meal back then, and how much of it still sneaks into your routine today. Alright, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You wake up on a damp straw mattress, the air heavy with wood smoke and old bread. Someone's already stirring the pot at the hearth. The smell hits you first. Beef bones, onions, oats, and something fishy. You stumble to your feet, still half asleep, and realise this isn't breakfast cereal. This is pottage. And it's not just your breakfast, it was yesterday's dinner, and possibly the day before's too. Pottage, you quickly learn, is less a dish and more a lifestyle. It's an ever-evolving stew. Grain, root veg, beans, scraps of meat when you're lucky. Cooked over the fire in the same cauldron for days on end, constantly added to, thickened, thinned out, spiced. Or not. It's how peasants and city folk alike stretched their food, saved on firewood, and made sure nothing went to waste. One pot, always boiling, always something to eat. You scoop a ladle into a rough wooden bowl. It's warm, filling, kind of bland, but oddly familiar, like that forgotten Tupperware soup you microwaved last week. You've just had your first taste of what medieval folks called perpetual stew, and what modern folks might call meal prep. Now, you might be wondering, why not just cook fresh each time? But cooking back then wasn't a leisurely choice. It was labour. It meant firewood, time, and risk. Kitchens were dangerous, fire was precious, and leftovers were a gift from heaven. Boiling everything together kept it safe from spoilage, and also probably from boredom. Still chewing, you wander outside and realise something surprising. Even wealthier households followed a similar routine. Not quite the same grey sludge, of course, but still soups and stews were favoured even in manors and castles. Breakfast was often a small meal, in name only. A hearty broth of meat and grains, maybe eggs, maybe a slab of bread so dense it could double as a roof tile. Even the idea of a light breakfast didn't show, up until much later. In medieval times you needed calories to work, whether you were a ploughman or a scribe, and that meant meat, grease, and porridge at sunrise. You spot a neighbour drinking something from a carved horn. It's warm, thin, and looks like milk, but smells tangy. It's posset, a mix of hot milk curdled with wine or ale and spiced with honey or nutmeg. People slurp it down before setting off to the fields. A strange bedtime drink today. But back then, it was how you got protein, fat and flavour in one gulp. Like a medieval protein shake. And yes, if you're noticing a theme, it's that breakfast back then wasn't sweet. No pancakes, no pastries, no sugary cereals. Instead, pottage, soup, cheese, warm ale, leftover meat pies. In fact, the idea of sugary breakfast didn't really arrive until colonial trade brought cheap sugar and chocolate centuries later. You pass a woman packing her lunch for the fields, wrapped not in plastic, but in a cloth bundle. Inside, a hard cheese wedge, a crust of yesterday's bread, and a thick smear of something black and sticky. It's black pudding, made from blood and oats, a breakfast classic, and one that still survives today in parts of Britain and Ireland. Later that morning, as you help stoke the fire for the next round of boiling, you start to notice how strangely efficient this whole setup is. The pottage pot is never truly cleaned, only topped off day after day. It sounds a bit alarming, but the constant heat kills off what needs killing, and the long simmer breaks everything down into one hearty, thick, nutritious mush. Some days it tastes like barley and wild garlic, others like cabbage and beef marrow. You never really know what you're eating, and somehow that's part of the charm. A boy drops a handful of dried herbs into the pot. Thyme, pennyroyal, maybe some marjoram. The mix varies by region and season, but herbs were a key part of flavouring, not just for taste but for balancing humours, as medieval folks would have said. You remember that phrase from earlier, how people believed your body had 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And every food either heated or cooled, moistened or dried your insides. Breakfast wasn't just fuel, it was a kind of medicine. At the edge of the room, a traveller unwraps his own breakfast, something entirely different. It's a slab of cold pork jelly wrapped in linen set into a mould with bits of boiled egg and pickled carrot. It's called brawn, medieval meat jelly. And yes, it's still around today. Just peek inside a British pork pie or a French head cheese. You never thought aspic would look so practical. The funny part, much of what you see here has trickled down into modern life in disguise. Soups for breakfast. Just ask any East Asian or Eastern European household. Bone broth in coffee mugs. That's ancient medieval wisdom with a hipster label. Fermented dairy, savoury oats, leftover. Stews, what once was survival has become superfood. You hear someone cursing softly. The day's stew is a little thin. They'll need to thicken it, maybe with oats, maybe with ground bread crusts. You offer to help and get handed a thick chunk of yesterday's trencher bread. Hard as stone, but perfect for the job. Tear, crumble, stir, and just like that, the soup is reborn again. This rhythm of reuse, of nothing wasted, starts to feel comforting, even calming. Everything has its place. You imagine the modern version, your fridge full of Tupperware, each container a mystery meal stacked high like a culinary time capsule. The pottage pot was no different. It just didn't need electricity. A woman sits beside you, smiling as she spoons up a bowl of warm lentil mush with salted turnip. "Better than yesterday," she says, and you believe her. Somehow, despite its humble ingredients and odd methods, this breakfast has soul. It changes slowly, flavours deepen, and you get to know your food like a living thing. You're not just feeding yourself, you're tending a relationship with your kitchen, your fire, your week-old stew. Outside, a bell tolls for noon, and someone's already prepping for supper. But you? You're full, warm, and strangely satisfied. You've eaten what generations before you ate, what still survives in tucked-away country kitchens and slow food circles across the world. Turns out medieval folks weren't so different after all. They liked things hot, hearty, and familiar. And so do you. Even if your version comes in a microwavable bowl, you reach for a drink, anything to wash down that thick bowl of barley and beans. But as you scan the rough wooden table, you find no pitcher of clean water, no sparkling spring in sight. Instead, every cup, mug and horn brims with something golden, foamy and oddly flat. It's ale. Not just for the feast, but for every meal. Morning, noon and night. You hesitate. Isn't that alcohol? Yes, it is. But not the kind you're used to. This is small ale, a weak, low-alcohol brew, often no stronger than today's kombucha. Brewed quickly, consumed quickly. You lift the mug, sniff and catch hints of sour grain and damp wood. One sip later, and it's surprisingly smooth. Not delicious exactly, but easy. Refreshing. Almost like tea. And in this age, it's the safest thing you can drink. The river nearby might look picturesque in the misty dawn, but it's full of waste. So is the well. So are the rain barrels, unless you boil the water first, and boiling water takes time, fuel and effort, all of which are precious. But fermentation, that's self-preserving. Yeast kills what needs killing. So medieval folks didn't drink ale to party. They drank it to survive. You spot a woman in a linen cap stirring a new batch by the fire. Barley mash bubbles in a large open pot. She'll strain it, cool it, pitch in wild yeast, then let it sit. No thermometer, no sanitizer, just instinct and routine. By tomorrow it'll be drinkable. By the next day it'll be gone. And this wasn't just for home kitchens. Even monasteries brewed daily, sometimes dozens of barrels at a time. Ale wasn't a luxury. It was the water of life. You sip again, this time more confidently. It's warming now. You glance around and realise everyone's drinking it. From the stable boy to the steward to the woman weaving baskets in the corner. It's just part of the rhythm. Even sick people are offered ale, often brewed with herbs like sage or betony for a medicinal twist. Some richer households have options beyond small ale, spiced wines, mead, even imported sweet wines from the Mediterranean. But most folks, ale is life, brewed fresh, stored cool and consumed quickly before it turns to vinegar. And yet, you start to notice subtle rules. A stronger brew is reserved for the evening. Midday ale is lighter. The morning ale, what you just drank, is practically liquid bread. Thick, nourishing, and just enough to keep you from fainting on your way to the fields. In one corner you hear a man arguing with a brewer about a bad batch. Apparently the yeast was angry and made the ale sour. Another woman swears she can read a brew by its foam. Thick bubbles mean happy yeast. Flat foam means disaster. There's even superstition in the air. One neighbour refuses to brew if it's storming outside. Another won't start a new batch unless the cat is watching. Brewing is part science, part ritual, and entirely essential. Later that afternoon, you find yourself helping carry jugs of the newest batch to a small storage alcove, cool and dark, lined with straw-covered bottles and wooden barrels. You learn quickly, ale doesn't keep well. It turns sour after just a few days unless consumed fast or turned into vinegar on purpose. That explains the constant brewing, the almost sacred attention given to the yeast, and the near obsession with clean fermentation gear, even if it's just scalded wooden paddles. You pass by a stack of herbs drying near the chimney: horehound, mugwort, ground ivy. None of these are for seasoning food. They're Groot, the bittering agents added before hops became popular. That's right. Medieval ale was often hop-free. Instead, people tossed in local herbs to give it bite, preservation, and sometimes even hallucinogenic properties. You look back at your mug and wonder how many hallucinating masons were working on cathedral rooftops after a strong Groot brew. Eventually hops did catch on, especially in Northern Europe. Hopped ale or beer lasted longer and could travel farther, which was a game-changer for commerce. But for most of medieval history, the earthy herbal ales ruled, wild in flavour and unpredictable in potency. And strangely enough, many of those ancient brewing traditions still exist today, quietly living on in microbreweries and backyard setups that claim to be returning to tradition. You sit beside an older woman who's sipping her third cup. She eyes you knowingly. "Doesn't bite, does it?" she asks. Then tells you a tale about a village brewer whose ale was so strong it made a knight fall off his horse before dinner. Not from drunkenness, but from surprise. Apparently no one warned him about the extra mugwort. And now the quirky part. In some places, ale wasn't just for drinking. It was for cooking and baking too. Some households added leftover brew to dough to give bread a richer flavour. Others used it to boil oats or reheat stale pottage. One family nearby even uses ale to clean copper pots, claiming it lifts grime better than water. Whether that's true or just an excuse to spill some, you're not sure. You catch wind of a brewing schedule written in charcoal above a doorway, market days marked with a symbol, feast days circled twice, and tiny sun and moon icons to indicate optimal yeast mood. You'd laugh, but given how much these people rely on ale, you get it. This isn't just a beverage, it's life insurance. And perhaps pride. Back in the present day, you think of the craft beer explosion, the fermentation kits gathering dust in your cousin's garage, or the sourdough starter that mysteriously appeared in your friend's kitchen during lockdown. Turns out, these aren't fads, they're echoes. Because even now, we love something old, bubbling, and just alive enough to feel magical. Medieval ale culture never really vanished. It just got rebranded with better glassware and Instagram filters. You tip your mug one last time and let the grainy herbal warmth linger. It's not quite water, not quite wine, but in this moment, it feels like home. You step into a different cottage now. Lower ceilings, thicker beams, and the heavy scent of flour and damp wood. In the corner, a small clay pot rests atop a folded cloth, partially covered by a carved wooden lid. At first glance, it looks unremarkable, but the way everyone glances at it as they pass, the way the older woman shushes the children nearby, you get the sense this thing is important, sacred even. You lift the lid slightly. A tangy, almost fruity scent escapes, followed by a faint bubble. Inside is a thick paste of flour and water, streaked with tiny pockets of air. This, your host explains, is the sourdough starter, and no one, not even the manor lord, touches it without washing their hands and offering a quick word of thanks. This bubbling creature has a name. Old Nan, the woman tells you, smiling. She's been alive for nearly 9 years. Longer than the last 2 husbands I buried, she adds with a wink, and that's the heart of it. In this kitchen, and many others across medieval Europe, the sourdough starter isn't just dough. It's a living family member, fed daily with flour and water, watched like a newborn, and if it dies, well, that's cause for mourning. You suddenly recall your modern friend bragging about her 3-year-old starter. Amateurs. Back then, yeast didn't come in little packets. You captured it wild from the air, the flour, the environment itself. Once you had a reliable starter, you guarded it. You carried it when you moved. You gave a lump to your daughter when she married. You passed it down like a jewel. And it wasn't just women keeping these wild cultures alive. In towns and cities, professional bakers often maintained master starters, thick, wet batches used to ferment huge troughs of dough. Apprentices were punished harshly for neglecting them. The fines for under-fermented bread weren't just monetary, they could ruin your name. In some cities, bread inspectors checked the loaves daily to make sure they were neither underbaked nor deceitfully weighted. Sourdough was serious business, because good bread meant survival. You help knead a batch, feeling the slow elasticity, the way the air bubbles stretch like tiny lungs. The older woman adds ground fennel seeds and leftover grains from last week's batch. No recipe, just memory. She slashes the top with a curved knife, lets it rise, then slides it into the communal oven shared by 5 families. As the crust darkens and splits, the smell fills the entire block. Rich, sour, ancient. Later that day, when the loaf cools enough to slice, you finally taste it. Chewy, complex, nothing like store-bought bread. It reminds you of something you once had in a hip cafe in the city, but this is better, deeper, less refined, and somehow more real. And that's when it hits you. This isn't nostalgia. This is continuity. This bread connects past to present in a way no castle or relic ever could. Every chew is history, fermented, baked and alive. As dusk settles, you walk with the baker's daughter down a winding dirt path to deliver a piece of old Nan to her cousin in the next village. Wrapped in cabbage leaves and stored in a cool pouch, the starter hums faintly with life. It's part gift, part necessity. Because without it, her cousin's loaves will fail, and no one wants to eat flatbread when winter's coming. Along the way, she tells you about starter rivalries. How one family swears their sourdough yields a more open crumb because their barn yeast is stronger. Another boasts a milder tang because they keep their jar near the onions. Everyone thinks their starter is the best, she says, just like everyone thinks their cow gives sweeter milk. But what's fascinating is how far this pride stretches, even now. You think about online forums and Instagram reels showing off bubbling glass jars, mason lids rattling slightly as bakers brag about hydration ratios, flour blends and feeding schedules. And it's exactly the same energy, just new tools. In the village square, you find an older man carving a symbol into the stone wall beside the oven. It's a spiral with dots, a starter mark. A quiet record of how long a particular batch has survived. Some towns even kept public ledgers tracking sourdough age like family trees. You're tempted to laugh until you realise these people baked with memory. At a small table, a group of children eat torn-off chunks of fresh bread dipped in herb vinegar and soft cheese. One child explains that the starter was sleepy last week, but woke up today. Apparently sourdough starters were also mood indicators. If it smelled off, rose too fast or collapsed too soon, it meant the air was angry or illness was coming. Quirky? Maybe. But to them, yeast was a barometer of life. Later that evening, someone mentions a traveller who ruined a village's starter by using metal tools. Others say it was cursed. Whatever the truth, that village had to start over, and it took months before their bread tasted right again. That's how delicate the balance was. One mistake, and your food security unravelled. You return to the cottage just in time to help with the morning feeding. A handful of flour, a splash of well water, a gentle stir. The dough breathes, it bubbles, it lives. And in that quiet, earthy ritual, you understand why this strange medieval habit survived. Because it doesn't just nourish the body, it nourishes trust, patience, continuity. Whether you're in a 14th century bakery or a 21st century kitchen, you're part of the same long, sticky lineage. You close your eyes, the warm scent of sour bread still lingering on your fingertips. You'll never look at toast the same way again. The next morning, you're poking around a larder behind someone's cottage when you're hit with a powerful nose-pinching tang. It's sharp, vinegary, almost rotten, but not quite. Rows of jars line the shelf, some with dark vegetables submerged in thick brine, others holding suspiciously grey eggs, and one that appears to be filled with fish. You step back. The jar burps. This is preservation, medieval style. Pickling, salting, curing, and letting things gently rot, all ancient techniques born from necessity. And strangely, most of them are still here today. That jar of pickled beets in your fridge, the sauerkraut your neighbour insists is good for your gut, the stinky fermented tofu in your favourite Asian market. All of it is cousin to the odd jars you're staring at now. A woman joins you, cheerful and unbothered. She lifts one jar and plucks out a long, pale root. Turnip, she says. Been under for 3 months. Winter's best friend. You watch as she chews it thoughtfully, then hands you a piece. It's cold, sour, and surprisingly crisp. Not bad. Back in the day, refrigeration wasn't a thing. Salt was expensive and drying required good weather. So the solution? Acid. Salt and vinegar created a hostile environment for spoilage. Better yet, fermented foods brought out new flavours and textures. Even better, people noticed something odd. Those who ate pickled or fermented foods seemed to stay healthier during hard times. They didn't know the word probiotic, but they knew survival. You follow her into a smoke-darkened kitchen where a pot of something unspeakable simmers. She lifts the lid. Inside is meat. Pork, you think, swimming in a thick, greasy liquid. She stirs slowly. You notice the walls of the pot are caked with a fatty layer. This isn't fresh stew. It's preserved meat, stored under its own lard, a dish known in some places as confit or potted meat. You dip your finger in. It's rich, savoury, still edible, though the thought of it sitting there for weeks unsettles you. Back in the larder, she shows you the pride of her shelf, fermented fish paste. Fish caught in summer, layered with salt and herbs, left to age in crocks for months. It smells like a shipwreck, but apparently it's used to flavour stews and sauces. One drop transforms an entire pot. The ancient Romans had garum, a similar fermented fish sauce that made its way into medieval cuisine. And the idea never really died. In fact, if you've ever used Worcestershire sauce or fish sauce in your cooking, you've unknowingly continued the tradition of pouring rot into your dinner. Then there's the eggs, you ask hesitantly. Preserved in ashen brine, she says, soft inside, keeps them for weeks. She cracks one open. The yolk is firm, the white nearly transparent. You decline a taste, she laughs and eats it herself. You help her seal a fresh jar of onions in spiced vinegar, and as the sharp scent fills the air, you begin to understand the appeal. Each jar is a tiny time capsule, a slice of summer saved for winter, a memory of harvest tucked away for the lean months. In a world where food didn't come from supermarkets and couldn't be frozen, these jars were life insurance. And they weren't just practical, they were flavourful, transformative, and deeply personal. As you crouch near the shelf, your eyes fall on a curious slab wrapped in linen and coated in fat. She unwraps it with reverence. Mutton pie, 4 weeks old, she says, as if it were a fine wine. The crust is thick and sealed tight. The filling, she explains, was cooked with spices and then buried in suet to block out air. This isn't rot, it's preservation by exclusion. No oxygen, no mould, just meat waiting for a feast day. Sounds strange? Perhaps. But meat pies like these are the great-great-grandparents of modern canned food, and the medieval practice of sealing meat in fat is a direct ancestor to many culinary traditions today, from French roulettes to rural pâté. You're reminded of that can of Spam your uncle swears by, of the tin of duck confit you saw in a gourmet store. It's all the same principle. Cook it, seal it, store it. What was once medieval necessity is now culinary luxury. The woman gestures toward a crock of fermenting cabbage in the corner, sauerkraut, though she wouldn't have called it that. In Germany and Eastern Europe, cabbage fermentation became an art. In Korea, it was kimchi. In Japan, tsukemono. Even now, entire fridges are dedicated to fermenting vegetables around the world, each jar fizzing with microbial magic. One neighbour walks in with a jar of pickled walnuts. Another brings fermented turnip greens. The variety is staggering. In this village alone, dozens of preservation methods exist, each with regional twists, family tweaks, and whispered secrets. Someone mentions butter buried in bogs to preserve it over summer. Another swears by storing apples in barley chaff under the bed. As the sun sets, the room glows golden with candlelight. You sit surrounded by jars, crocks, cloths, and the low murmur of people discussing food. Not just what it is, but what it was, and what it might be months from now. You suddenly realize how deep time runs in these meals. Every preserved thing holds a little past. A harvest long gone, a moment of warmth captured in brine or sealed in fat. It's more than food, it's memory you can chew. You breathe in the scent of vinegar, spice, and slow transformation. Maybe that's why pickles and fermented food still charm us today, because somewhere in all that sour, salty, funky flavour is the taste of resilience. It's market day in the village, and as you weave between stalls of rough-woven cloth and baskets of onions, something new hits your senses. A sharp, metallic smell of blood, a wisp of roasted marrow, and something undisguisedly earthy. You follow your nose to a wooden board heaped with parts that modern butchers rarely display. Hearts, livers, kidneys, lungs, all glistening, all for sale. Welcome to the world of offal, the hidden side of medieval eating, and one that surprisingly never quite disappeared. The butcher waves a hand proudly. Pluck, he says, referring to the full set of organs, often sold together. For medieval cooks, these weren't scraps. They were central ingredients, nutritious, plentiful, and affordable. Rich folks might prefer clean cuts from the haunch or breast, but working families embraced the rest. Nothing went to waste. You're handed a skewer of something hot. It's liver, grilled with onion and sage, still dripping fat. It's earthy, intense, strangely satisfying. One bite in, and you understand. This wasn't a compromise. It was a taste people liked. In fact, some of the most beloved medieval dishes centred on organ meats. Blood pudding made from pig's blood and oats, fried sweetbreads, kidneys braised in ale, even brains mashed with eggs and herbs. To them, eating nose to tail wasn't a statement. It was just food logic. Waste not, want not. And it wasn't just about nutrition. According to humoral theory, different organs carried different properties. Liver was warm and moist, good for vitality. Lung was light, easy to digest. Kidney? Excellent for balancing melancholy, though that probably had more to do with superstition than science. You stop by a cook shop where a huge iron pan sizzles over an open flame. The cook flips slices of tripe with practiced rhythm, sprinkling on dried mint and vinegar. Beef stomach, she tells you. Young beast, very mild. You watch as labourers line up for a bowl, eager for the chewy, tangy stew. No one's complaining. Some are asking for seconds. As the sun climbs, you help carry a basket of fresh offal to the town's almshouse. There, older villagers prepare a broth of hearts and onions for the poor. The smell is rich and comforting. The broth pale brown with floating flecks of thyme. One woman, toothless and hunched, sips it slowly and whispers, "Tastes like childhood." You think back to the modern world. Fancy pâté, foie gras on toast points, bone marrow served with tiny silver spoons. These things, now delicacies, were once everyday survival food. What was poor man's stew is now high-end cuisine. It's ironic, really. The same liver that once simmered in peasant pots now sits atop white linen napkins, garnished with edible flowers. You step into the shade of a small outbuilding behind the cook shop where scraps and trimmings are being sorted, not for the bin, but for tomorrow's meal. The offal is divided carefully. Some to be, salted, some hung to dry, others minced for pies. Nothing is wasted. Even the bladder of a pig is set aside, to be cleaned, inflated and used as a casing, or even, in some places, as a cooking pouch. An apprentice shows you a wooden bowl filled with minced spleen, mixed with sweet, breadcrumbs, onions and spices. For tomorrow's hand pies, he says, travel's better than stew. The aroma is savoury and rich, and for a moment you wonder how many things wrapped in pastry back home hide ingredients you'd rather not name. And then there's black pudding, not just a breakfast staple, but a vital way of using blood. You watch as a young woman stirs fresh pig's blood with oats, lard and thyme. The mixture is thick, almost cake-like, before she spoons it into cloth tubes and hangs them near the fire. In a few hours it will firm up into a dark, dense sausage. By morning, It'll be sliced and fried for workers heading to the fields. You might shudder, but she raises a brow. Better this than waste, she says plainly. And she's right. You think of how many modern kitchens throw out trimmings, fat, and anything with a bit of membrane. Yet here, those very things are honoured. Not all offal dishes were humble. In noble households, stuffed tongues, veal kidneys in wine, and spiced liver partés were signs of wealth, served alongside peacock and roasted boar. You picture a banquet with silver platters gleaming under candlelight, and realise, even in palaces, the organ meats never disappeared. They were just dressed differently, and some oddities still defy expectations. In one stall, a merchant sells umbilical cords, dried and boiled into jelly, used in certain folk remedies. Another sells boiled sheep's heads, eyes intact. These aren't novelties, they're nourishment, especially in hard winters when choice is a luxury. Back in the kitchen, the smell of roasted marrow fills the air. Bones are cracked open, their fatty centres scooped out and smeared on coarse bread. It's rich, almost buttery, a delicacy today. Back then, just another Tuesday. You suddenly remember that trendy restaurant downtown, the one with roasted bone marrow on the menu for $20 a plate, or the deli that serves chopped liver with caramelized onions and rye bread, or the nose-to-tail chef on television who claims to be reviving old traditions. But the truth is, those traditions never died. They simply went underground, into home kitchens, working-class diners, and aging family cookbooks, and now they're rising again, like a marrow-slick ghost from history's pantry. You watch as one final dish is served, a thick stew of lungs and barley, flavoured with pepper and sage. The flavour is bold, slightly metallic, but deeply warming. As you sip, you realise this is more than just food. It's philosophy, a way of saying everything matters, every part has value, even the hidden, the rejected, the forgotten, and maybe, in a world obsessed with perfection and polish, that's the strangest and most enduring lesson of all. You find yourself walking toward a small wooden outbuilding behind the manor where a sharp, pungent smell drifts on the breeze. It's not unpleasant, more like bread dough left too long near the hearth, with a whiff of apples gone soft. Inside, wooden tubs and ceramic crocks bubble quietly. You peek into one and are met with a beige, pasty porridge studded with barley and shredded cabbage. Let it sit 3 more days, a woman mutters, tapping the lid. It needs the sour. Welcome to the fermented heart of medieval cuisine. In this village, fermentation isn't a trend. It's survival, taste, and tradition rolled into one bubbling, stinking tub. Everything from grains to vegetables to dairy gets the long, slow treatment. And here, unlike modern pasteurized packaged goods, the food is alive. Literally. You walk over to another corner where 2 boys are stirring a clay vat of ale porridge. Not just a drink, but a warm meal. Barley soaked in sour ale, sweetened with a little dried fruit, then left to ferment into a mash that's tangy, chewy, and surprisingly filling. They ladle you a bowl. It's unlike anything you've tasted before. The ale's bitterness blends with the grain's warmth. Your mouth puckers, then smiles. An older man at the doorway offers you a sip of something darker, beet kvass, made from fermenting root vegetables in salted water, sharp, earthy, deeply red. He grins as your eyes water slightly. Wakes you up better than prayer, he says. It's not just vegetables and grain. The dairy here is practically alive with fermenting life. You're handed a bowl of clabber, milk left to sour and thicken on its own, turning into a soft, spoonable curd. Sprinkle on some herbs, maybe a bit of honey, and you've got breakfast, lunch and dessert all in one. It's rich, tangy, and tastes older than time. You glance around and realize nearly everything in this kitchen is fermenting. There's sour milk in the corner, bubbling porridge on the table, jars of sour greens on the sill. Nothing is refrigerated, nothing is sterile. But somehow it all works. And the best part? Medieval folks knew it worked. They might not have understood microbiology, but they trusted time. They believed in resting foods, those that improved with patience, that became softer, safer, and more digestible the longer they sat. Some even believed fermentation was part of nature's divine plan, that foods wanted to evolve, and by letting them do so, you aligned yourself with the natural order. Sourness was not a flaw, it was wisdom. You walk outside where a group is preparing fermented fish, layering tiny river fish with salt, rice, and herbs in a barrel. It will sit all summer and be eaten midwinter. The smell is potent, but everyone treats it like a treasure chest waiting to open. You think back to your fridge at home. Yogurt, kefir, sourdough, pickles, all part of the same ancient club, and those trendy kombucha jars and bubbling fermentation kits, imitations of this raw, centuries-old intimacy with food. As the wind shifts, you're invited into another home at the edge of the village. Inside, it's quiet, dim, and thick, with the scent of something sweetly sour. A wide bowl rests in the centre of the table, covered with cloth and tied with a string. You're told not to speak too loudly. The mishmish is sleeping. You peer in. It's a fermented fruit mash, made from bruised apples, dried plums, and wild honey, left to bubble slowly over several days. The surface fizzes gently. This strange medieval preserve is destined not for dessert, but to be stirred into stews, diluted into drinks, or even eaten with meat. It's a sour, sweet flavour enhancer, and every household has their own version, passed down like folklore. A man offers you a small piece of rye bread slathered in curdled milk cheese, then topped with a spoonful of the fruit mash. It's odd. Bright, sour, creamy, slightly alcoholic. But somehow it works. It's alive, in every sense. And then comes the real surprise. Some fermented foods aren't even for eating. A jar of sour milk is being mixed with clay and ashes to make a kind of poultice for aching joints. Another woman swears by rinsing her hair in beer once a week. Fermented grain water is dabbed onto cracked skin. These aren't accidents. They're customs built over lifetimes of watching nature work. You're handed a stoneware cup filled with a cloudy, slightly effervescent liquid. Medieval grain kvass. It's made by soaking dried rye crusts in water, fermenting it with herbs, and letting it sparkle into something halfway between soup and soda. A field worker nearby calls it his favourite thing on hot days. It's cheap, light, and, thanks to fermentation, safer than the local water. That's the quiet magic of all this. The livingness. Medieval kitchens didn't wage war against microbes. They welcomed them. Fermentation was how people made food last, yes, but also how they made food better. How they coaxed complex flavours from humble scraps. How they turned what might rot into something rich. In the garden outside, jars of fermenting beans sit beneath the soil, sealed in clay marked with symbols. This batch, you're told, won't be opened until midwinter. The thought of burying food to eat half a year later might seem strange now, but to them it was security. It was the future, hidden underfoot. You sit down by the hearth again, sipping a warm drink made from fermented oats and herbs. It tastes ancient, familiar, and oddly comforting. And as the flames crackle, you realise nothing here is fast. Nothing is instant. Everything is slow, deliberate, gently changing over time, just like people, just like memory. Even now, in a world of refrigeration and fast food, there's a quiet pull back toward these old ways. Sourdough counters, fermentation blogs, tiny jars of homemade kimchi. You smile, because you've just lived through the original version. It's nearly noon now, and the village square is buzzing with the midday meal. People gather at trestle tables beneath a sagging canvas awning, chatting, laughing, and tearing into chunks of coarse bread. As you approach with your bowl of stew in hand, you pause, because there's something missing. No forks. There are no utensils at all, really, aside from a few worn knives strapped to belts and tucked into aprons. Most people are eating with their hands. Right hands, to be specific. And that knife? It's not for spreading butter or slicing cheese. It's your personal, everyday tool for food, for work, for defense. In this world, a single sharp blade and clean fingers are all you need to dine. You sit and awkwardly try to mimic the others, scooping up thick lentil mash with torn bits of bread, slicing a salted radish with the knife you were handed earlier. It feels strange at first, primitive, maybe even uncivilized. But the more you watch, the more you realize there's an art to it. People know how to eat without making a mess. They cradle bits of food in bread, use the tip of the knife to spear slippery onions, and never waste a crumb. You see no forks because forks were rare, even into the late Middle Ages. Where they existed, they were more status symbol than utensil, reserved for the nobility, and even then eyed with suspicion for being too foreign, too delicate, too vain. Hands, on the other hand, were universal, cleaned before and after meals, often with bowls of scented water passed around the table. You're offered one now, rose water, warm, with floating mint leaves. It smells better than most soaps you've used. Across the table, a travelling friar pulls out his own knife, a slim, bone-handled blade, uses it to peel a boiled egg, then wipes it clean on a scrap of cloth. This blade, he says, belonged to his father. It's not just a tool, it's tradition. In an age where eating was often communal, having your own knife was like carrying your own ID. You're handed a small loaf stuffed with cheese and onions. It's dense, wrapped in cloth, and warm from the hearth. You try to split it apart, too tough. So you do what everyone else does. You stab the side with your knife, pry it open, and eat the filling first. There's something freeing about it. No cutlery to clink. No rules about how to hold what. Just fingers and blade and bread. A group of children run past, laughing with greasy hands, waving half-eaten turnips on sticks. No one tells them to stop or clean up, because here, mess is part of the meal. So long as you wash before and after, no one minds what happens in between. Next to you, a merchant delicately cuts strips of cured meat with a curved blade, balancing them on a slice of rye. He offers you one, then casually wipes his knife on his sleeve. "It's cleaner than the table," he jokes, and you glance down to see that he's probably right. The table is communal, unvarnished, often stained. That's why hands and knives mattered so much. They were yours. You could keep them clean. Nearby, a cook tosses hot dumplings into a wooden bowl. She tears one open with her fingers, letting the steam rise. No spoons, no ladles, just scoops of hand-pressed filling, warm and slick and fast to eat. You suddenly realise that cutlery isn't necessary for food to be satisfying, or even civilised. It's just one path among many. The oldest woman at the table leans toward you, pulling something from her apron. It's a spoon, hand-carved, narrow, worn thin by decades of use. "Had this since I was a girl," she says, "for soups, for bad teeth." She lifts it to her lips, sips from a thick barley broth, then tucks it away again. Not everyone had a spoon, but those who did guarded it carefully. For all its rarity, it was a lifeline when chewing failed. And forks? Not one in sight. In most of medieval Europe, the fork was still seen as exotic, almost scandalous, originating in the East and regarded with suspicion for centuries. Using one was even seen as vanity in some circles. Why pierce your food like a bird when God gave you fingers? Yet somehow eating with hands wasn't crude. It was intimate. You felt your food before you tasted it. You learned to measure heat and texture with your fingertips. You moved more slowly, more deliberately, and mealtimes weren't quiet affairs. They were lively, messy, full of shared bowls, laughter, and the occasional fight over the last piece of cheese. You think about your own meals, wrapped in plastic, served in individual containers, eaten with identical metal tools, safe, clean, isolated. There's something here you didn't know you missed. As the meal winds down, water basins reappear. People rinse their hands, some even brushing fingers with ash or crushed herbs. Cleanliness was taken seriously, especially when utensils were your skin. And as you sit there licking crumbs from your thumb, blade tucked back into your belt, you realise something simple. There's nothing less civilised about eating with your hands. It's just another language of food, older, warmer, more honest. You reach for one last crust of bread and scoop up a bit of goat cheese. It's soft, salty, and delicious. No fork needed, just memory. And your fingertips. The next morning you're invited to help prepare for a small family gathering. In the centre of the kitchen, slabs of coarse bread are being cut into thick, flat rounds and set out not on plates, but as plates. The cook gives you a nod. Today, we eat from trenchers. You pick one up. It's heavy, dense, and slightly stale. That's the point. These trencher loaves are a medieval staple. Thick slices of old bread used not just for eating from, but sometimes instead of ceramic ware. They soak up sauces, hold stew, cradle meat. By the end of the meal, they're saturated, soft, and sometimes eaten. More often, though, they're set aside, dried again, and reused, or fed to pigs, beggars, or dogs. It's efficient, practical, and strangely elegant. You help arrange the meal. A thick leek and lentil stew, some blood sausage, and a dollop of sour apple mash, all ladled directly onto the trenchers. There are no plates in sight, no napkins either. Just bread, hands, and your old friend, the personal knife. When the food arrives at the table, everyone digs in. Some carve their trencher crust and chew alongside their stew. Others let it soak until the end. You follow suit, tearing off a hunk and biting in. It's chewy, tangy, soaked in gravy, and honestly, better than half the rolls you've ever had at restaurants. Across from you, a boy gathers the leftover trenchers and drops them into a wicker basket. These'll go to the friars, someone explains. It's part of the local custom. Food that isn't finished gets passed on, especially bread, which is too sacred to waste. Some households even donate theirs to hospitals or bakehouses, where the scraps are turned into feed or pressed into new dough. And while trenchers might seem primitive, they're not without variation. In wealthier homes, trenchers were made of fine Manchi bread, a softer, whiter loaf reserved for the upper class. These would often be eaten at the end of the meal, not discarded. At fancy feasts, a separate sop trench might even be laid, soaked in broth or wine, served with care, flavoured with herbs. You help prepare a second course, roasted vegetables and slices of salted pork laid carefully atop fresh trenchers. The bread now acts as a base, a serving dish, a sponge, and, if you're hungry enough, a dessert. Everything is edible, everything has purpose. And then someone pulls out a wooden board, not for serving cheese, but for cutting bread bowls. These thicker loaves are hollowed out, filled with hot stew, then passed out to the younger men. When the meal is done, they eat the bowl. You glance at the pile of crumbs, the chewed crusts, the sauce-streaked centres of what were once solid slabs, and it dawns on you. The entire meal left no waste, no ceramics to scrub, no pots to wash, just bread, bones, and satisfied faces. Later that day, you follow a group of kitchen workers to the back of the manor, where old trenchers are being collected in a large wicker basket. The smell is sour, bready, and oddly comforting. These are the leftovers. The bread plates, too soaked in stew to be reused, too soft to hold another meal, but they're not trash. One of the older women slices the soggy trenchers into strips and lays them out to dry on wooden racks. "Tomorrow's stew thickener," she says simply. You blink. So not only was the plate edible, it's about to become part of tomorrow's dish. Other pieces, those beyond saving, are bundled into a cloth sack destined for the nearby poorhouse. "Don't call it stale," someone mutters. "Call it seasoned." You realise the trencher was never just a cost-saving trick. It was part of a larger cycle. Food as tool, food as tableware, food as charity. In wealthier homes, you learn, this humble bread plate took on more elaborate forms. There were double trenchers, one dry layer beneath a soft one, to keep hands clean. Some trenchers were even carved with family crests for grand banquets, then ceremonially discarded or sent to monasteries. Bread, after all, was sacred. It couldn't just be thrown away. You watch as a cook grates an old trencher into a simmering pot of onion broth. The mixture thickens instantly, the bread melting into the liquid. It's a trick still used today in rustic kitchens, adding stale bread to soups to give body and depth. Even modern recipes for Italian papa al pomodoro or French onion soup owe something to this medieval ingenuity. Outside, a group of travellers snack on hard crusts softened in warm beer. Others dip trenchers into honeyed vinegar, turning them into makeshift tarts. One man swears by a bread porridge, made from boiled trenchers, egg yolk and dried fruit, a dish both humble and celebratory, depending on how you flavour it. You begin to see the genius behind it. Trenchers weren't just edible convenience. They were an expression of a time where every crumb had value. In a world without disposable goods, without paper plates or plastic wrap, the trencher was a brilliant solution. Part plate, part meal, part offering. You close your eyes and imagine your own world trying this again. Picnics without packaging, dinner parties with edible dishes, charity meals served not on plastic trays but on something warm, nourishing, and human. Before the day ends, someone hands you a fresh trencher, still warm from the oven. You don't eat it, not yet. You just hold it. Feel the weight, the density, the quiet wisdom baked into it. And maybe that's what stays with you the most. The idea that even the most mundane object, a chunk of bread, can carry tradition, dignity, and care. All you have to do is look a little closer and maybe take a bite. The next meal you share begins simply enough. A bowl of dried peas, boiled soft with onion and garlic and sprinkled with ground pepper. But then things get strange. Someone hands you a small, oily tart made with dried figs and saffron. Another scoops a dark sauce onto your barley, thick with cinnamon, nutmeg, and something smoky. And the roast duck. It's been glazed with honey and vinegar, then dusted. Yes, dusted, with cloves and cardamom. You pause, confused. This is not what you expected from a medieval meal. But here's the surprise. Medieval cooks didn't shy away from flavour. In fact, they loved it wild, complex, and downright chaotic. And they had a particular love for spice. Long before sugar became king, it was spice that ruled the kitchen. Spices weren't just for the wealthy. They were treasured, traded, and yes, misused by nearly everyone who could afford a pinch. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, long pepper, even grains of paradise, all ground together into sauces, stews, pies, and porridge. You dip a slice of beef into a plum sauce that tastes oddly like mulled wine and barbecue. It's good, very good, but you're not entirely sure what you're eating. That was often the point. In the medieval kitchen, flavour layering was a sign of status, skill, and creativity. And balance wasn't necessarily the goal. Surprise was. In the manor kitchen, you watch a cook prepare black sauce, a mixture of blood, breadcrumbs, vinegar and spices, often served with game birds. It's rich and pungent, the colour of ink, and somehow both sweet and sour at once. He grins when you flinch. Food should have teeth, he says. It's not all shocking. In a small side room, the cooks are grinding dried herbs and toasted seeds to make poudre douce, a sweet spice blend used in everything from stews to desserts. One version contains cinnamon, sugar and ginger. Another leans into pepper and nutmeg. Cooks here don't follow recipes. They follow instinct, and every household spice mix is a bit different. A young apprentice offers you a spiced pear, poached in red wine, clove, and a touch of black pepper. It's soft, fragrant, and could sit comfortably on any modern dessert menu. Except here, it's not dessert. It's part of the main course. That's another oddity of medieval meals. Sweet and savoury weren't separated like they are today. Meat pies had raisins. Rice dishes included almond milk and sugar. Even fish might be served with dates or honey glaze. You take a bite of chicken stewed with apricots and almond paste. It's warm, creamy and confusing in the best way. As the feast continues, a servant sets down a new dish. A pasty filled with hard-boiled eggs, minced pork, and prunes. You hesitate, but everyone else digs in with enthusiasm. The contrast is startling. Savoury meat wrapped in pastry, suddenly interrupted by a pocket of deep, sticky sweetness. It shouldn't work, but somehow it does. This is medieval cuisine at its most experimental. One of the cooks nearby catches your puzzled expression and chuckles. The tongue likes surprise, she says, and in this kitchen, surprise is served by the ladleful. Even something as simple as buttered cabbage is transformed, seasoned not with salt but with sugar, ginger and vinegar. The flavours dance in your mouth. You can't tell if it's meant to be side dish or dessert. That ambiguity is the point. To a medieval diner, good food was layered, unexpected, and sometimes even disorienting. You wander to the pantry shelves and notice tiny cloth bags tied with string. They hold dried orange peel, galangal root, cubeb pepper, imports from lands you've only heard of in stories. Spices were so valuable they were locked away, counted like coins. In some places they were quite literally part of the dowry, and yet they show up in humble dishes too. A bowl of fish stew bubbles over the fire, rich with parsley, vinegar and saffron. Nearby, a porridge of oats and onions is stirred with cinnamon and bay. These weren't accidents. Medieval cooks believed that spices balanced the humours, kept you healthy, and purified food that might otherwise be questionable. Flavour was medicine. In the corner, someone grates hard cheese over pears soaked in white wine. You try it and blink. It's not strange, it's familiar, like a bite of something modern, but slightly off script. And that's when it hits you. So much of what we think of as gourmet fusion today is simply medieval logic. Mixing strong flavours, breaking rules, chasing contrast. Even the drinks follow suit. Ale is mixed with spices. Wine is infused with rosemary or pepper. You're handed a mug of Hippocras, a sweetened spiced wine served warm. It tastes like mulled wine at a winter market. Except this was a dinner drink, not a holiday treat. Every sip a mix of history and heat, and the best part. There's no sense of pretense, no worry about pairings or plating. The food is messy, loud, a little chaotic, and fully alive. Every dish tells a story, not just of hunger, but of curiosity, trade, migration, and imagination. You sit back, full and bewildered, realising you've just eaten cinnamon beef, fig mustard, and sugared turnips in one sitting. And somehow, you're not mad about it. Because flavour, you now understand, was freedom. In a world full of danger and rules and limits, the medieval table was where people could be bold. And they were. With spices, with sweetness, with everything. The first frosters arrived. You can see it clinging to the thatch roofs and edging the morning vegetables in a fine white crust. The village is quieter today, the laughter replaced by a kind of steady determination. Winter isn't coming, it's here, and that means only one thing. It's time to preserve the meat. In the centre of the courtyard, a group of villagers gather around a large wooden table. Laid across it is a freshly butchered pig. There's no ceremony, no wasteful weeping, just a quiet, methodical rhythm. This pig is not just dinner. It's weeks of survival, maybe months. You're handed a bowl of coarse salt, nearly white as snow, and instructed to rub it deep into the cuts of meat. Hams, shoulders, ribs. It all gets packed in layers of salt stacked in barrels and covered with a heavy lid. This is salt preservation, a practice as old as civilization itself. Before refrigeration, salt was king. It pulled moisture from the meat, kept bacteria at bay, and turned something fleeting into something lasting. The village has a whole system for it. Different families specialise in different parts. Some focus on salting, others on hanging meat over the hearth to smoke, still others on rendering fat. You help hang long strips of belly from a rafter, the fat already dripping slowly into a clay basin below. This is where laird comes from. Not a block in foil, but a patient, smoky drip of survival. The hams are placed in cloth and stored in a cool, dry space above the bread oven. They'll hang there for months, slowly hardening, darkening, absorbing the scents of ashen bread. You're told they'll be boiled for feasts or sliced thin and added to pottage when fresh meat is long gone. Even the bones have a purpose. They're boiled now, while fresh, to make stock. The remaining bits are picked clean and ground into rillettes, shredded meat mixed with fat, then sealed in crocks. The result? A medieval version of canned meat, still eaten today in parts of France, and then comes the blood. A group of women mix it quickly with oats, onions and dried herbs before it clots. They pour it into cloth casings and set it near the fire to firm. Black pudding, they say simply. What some call a delicacy today was, for them, the difference between a full belly and a hungry winter. In the corner, children gather bristles for brushes. The stomach will be cleaned and used to store sausage. Even the intestines have purpose. They're washed, stretched, and filled with spiced pork, then twisted into links and hung from the beams. Every part of the animal has a destiny. As the day goes on, the salty rhythm continues. You help carry full barrels of meat into a stone-lined cellar, the air inside cool and heavy. Here, among jars of pickled beans and dusty bottles of vinegar, the salted pork will rest for weeks, even months. Each barrel is dated with a charcoal mark, the meat carefully layered between handfuls of coarse salt and crushed bay, leaves. Don't open too early, the old man warns. It needs to sleep. Outside, strips of meat are being hung over smouldering juniper branches. The smoke curls upward, clinging to every surface. This is cold smoking, a technique that infuses flavour and dries the meat slowly. It's not cooking, it's transformation. Within days, the pork will darken, firm up and smell like wood, fat and ash. You ask how long it lasts. The answer, as long as you need it to. A woman stirs a bubbling pot of rendered fat, tossing in sprigs of thyme and wild garlic. When it cools, it'll become lard infused with herbs, a medieval kitchen's butter, oil and preservative rolled into one. She pours some into a crock, then drops in a chunk of leftover venison. When sealed in fat and kept cool, it could stay good for months. You suddenly realise this isn't just food, it's strategy. And yet, none of this feels grim. There's pride here. Every slab salted, every sausage tied, every pot of dripping poured is a step closer to security, to knowing that when the snow falls thick and the roads are ice, there will still be meat. In the evening you join a small feast. It's not grand. Just a few slices of last year's smoked ham, some hard bread, a spoonful of turnip mash. But the ham is rich, salty, edged with smoke. You chew slowly, tasting the months it took to make. The man next to you nods. "That one's from the old boar," he says. "Hung 13 months. Ate nothing but acorns." You think of the modern fridge at home, the vacuum-sealed plastic, the pre-sliced meats with vague labels. Here, every bite has a backstory. Every slice is a memory, salted and cured. You can taste the season in it, and remarkably, many of these methods still survive. Country hams aged in smokehouses, prosciutto in Italy, jamon in Spain, rillettes in France, sausages packed in casings and sold at winter markets. These aren't reinventions, they're continuations, threads pulled straight from the medieval larder. You help clean up, scraping salt from the table and pouring off brine. The final bits of meat are wrapped in cloth, labelled and stacked. Someone sings softly, a preservation song passed down through generations. Before bed, you pass the cellar one more time. Inside, in the cool dark, a season's labour now rests in silence, waiting to be summoned when the world outside grows barren. And somehow it brings comfort, because in that quiet, salted dark, you feel something warm, proof that with care, even the shortest days can still be full. Today's meal arrives not in courses but in layers. You sit on a long wooden bench in the manor's great hall, eyeing the dishes as they're brought out. First, a large pie, filled with fish, almonds and raisins. Then a platter of roast goose, oddly dusted with sugar and cloves. And finally a jelly made from milk, coloured bright yellow with saffron. All served together. No starters, no mains, no desserts. Just a confusing, flavourful mountain of food all at once. This is the medieval feast, where meals weren't structured by logic but by spectacle. A servant places a fresh trencher before you, and you stare as each item is plopped onto the same slab of bread. Chicken beside custard, salted eel beside honeyed carrots. It's not a mistake. It's tradition. In many medieval households, especially on feast days, dishes were served in removes or layers, not in the neat sequence we expect today. Your neighbour happily scoops fish jelly beside a meat pie. Another man dips his sausage in a sauce made with wine and breadcrumbs. You pause, but then follow suit. And to your surprise, it works. Somehow, the sweet, the savoury, the sour, they coexist. Not cleanly, but in conversation. Back in the kitchen, you watch the chaos unfold. Multiple dishes cooked at once, then rushed out hot, or cold, depending on the plan. Cooks use no timers, no thermometers, just instinct and rhythm. Timing is everything. Because once the dishes are ready, they must be served together. One overcooked item could throw off the entire balance. You help stack pastries onto a large board. They look sweet, glazed with honey and cinnamon, but you're told they contain minced beef, bone marrow and chopped dates. Don't judge by the crust, someone laughs. It's a lesson you've now learned well. In another corner, someone is boiling fruit in spiced wine. Not for dessert, but to accompany roast pork. A kind of medieval chutney, rich and sharp, meant to cut through the fat. The result is strangely familiar. Tart, fragrant, and oddly like the cranberry sauce at your last holiday dinner. As the feast continues, the strangeness becomes comforting. A spoonful of creamy almond rice is followed by a bite of peppered beef, then a syrupy apple tart, served not at the end, but midway through the meats. There is no attempt to separate the sweet from the savoury. It's all just food, and it's all on your trencher. You begin to understand. The medieval palate wasn't concerned with order, it was enchanted by variety. The thrill came from contrast, a rich dish balanced by a sour one, a spicy pie soothed by sugared milk. In the best kitchens, it wasn't about refinement, it was about abundance, layers, surprise. A man beside you tells a story of a feast where 50 dishes were served in 2 removes, all at once. No one could finish everything, of course, but that wasn't the point. The point was to impress, to display wealth through overwhelming flavour. You think of modern tasting menus, bite after bite of precisely timed dishes. This was the same spirit, just louder, messier, more medieval. A platter of white leech is passed down, a moulded jelly made of almond milk, sugar and rice flour. It jiggles strangely beside a bowl of onion gravy and a plate of roast venison. Yet no one blinks. That's just how things are done. Nearby, a pie is sliced open, revealing layers inside. Pigeon, rabbit, quince, prunes and boiled eggs, all encased in a stiff, inedible crust known as a coffin. You marvel at the engineering. It's a meal, yes, but also architecture. You notice another oddity. Fish and fruit are often paired. Poached trout with sour cherries, salt cod with preserved lemon and coriander. It feels oddly modern. You could imagine it on a trendy restaurant menu, described with phrases like farmhouse fusion or seasonal layering. But here, it's simply the way things have always been. Even drinks aren't exempt. You sip a wine that's been mulled with ginger and cardamom, then follow it with a sweet mead infused with herbs. There's no distinction between cocktail and digestive, just a steady rhythm of flavour. By the end of the meal, your trencher is soaked and soft. It's taken on everything. The gravies, the spices, the fruit syrups and meat drippings. You tear off a piece and eat it. It's the whole feast in one bite. Dense, complex, strange, and unforgettable. And in that bite, you see it clearly. The medieval table was a map of the world, or at least the known world. Spices from the east, fruits from the south, meats from nearby fields, and techniques passed down through centuries. Everything blended, everything touching. Today we separate our courses, flavour profiles, even ingredients. But back then, food was a tapestry, woven tight, served all at once. And somehow it made sense. The next morning your host offers you a bowl of broth before anything else. It's light, fragrant, and oddly herbal, almost like drinking a meadow. Floating on the surface are sprigs of fresh sage and a few leaves of something you can't quite name. You sip it slowly. It warms your chest and clears your head. Good for the humours, she says with a wink, and for the bowels. Welcome to the world where food and medicine were the same thing. In medieval kitchens, herbs weren't just seasoning, they were treatment. Every leaf, root and petal had meaning. Some calmed the nerves, others cleansed the blood, some were used to flavour stews, others were brewed into teas, but often they did both at once. You were never just eating to fill your belly, you were balancing your body. In the garden behind the cottage you walk through rows of sage, rosemary, thyme and hyssop. The woman leading you carries a small knife and a bundle of cloth. She cuts only what's needed, nothing more. Too much rosemary makes the blood too hot, she mutters, but thyme is good for winter phlegm. You nod, unsure whether to agree, but fascinated. She hands you a small green shoot. Lovage. Strong. Celery-like. Used in nearly everything, from pottage to sauces to wine infusions. Good for the kidneys, she says, chewing the end casually. And it's not just a folk belief. Modern science would eventually confirm that many of these plants do in fact have medicinal properties. Back inside, you help prepare a herb-infused cheese spread. It's made with soft curds, crushed garlic, and a mash of parsley and chives. It smells fresh and sharp, perfect with stale bread. But to the people here, it's also good for digestion, blood circulation, and melancholy. You watch as dried fennel is sprinkled over pickled beets, not just for taste, but because it was thought to ease wind and calm the stomach. Mint is added to boiled peas, not just for the refreshing lift, but to chase away bad humours. In the cool shade of the storeroom, bundles of dried herbs hang from every beam, tied with twine, labelled in faded script and swaying slightly with the draught. You spot wormwood, angelica, borage, and comfrey, names that sound more like spells than spices. Yet here, they're as common as salt. A boy brings in a basket of onions, which his mother sprinkles with marjoram and sets to roast. Not just for flavour, she tells you, but to open the chest. Nearby, someone's grinding mustard seed and horseradish, not only for meat sauces, but to cut through winter dampness. In this world, food isn't simply eaten, it's felt. The tongue, the gut, the skin, the spirit. Every bite might strengthen your blood or cool your liver. The older woman preparing a pot of lentils warns you not to add garlic and leeks, or it might stir the blood too wildly. You nod solemnly, unsure what that means, but very sure you'll avoid it. Later in the day, you watch, as a posset is prepared. It's a warm curdled drink made from milk, ale, honey and spices. Served just before bed, it's meant to soothe the body, ease digestion, and calm the nerves. One woman insists it prevents nightmares. Another swears it keeps coughs away. Whether remedy or ritual, it feels deeply right. You start to notice how many foods here are infused, steeped, or stirred with intention. Wine is mulled with pepper and saffron. Vinegar is left to rest with elderflowers. Even water, rarely drunk plain, is mixed with lemon balm or sage. Every liquid is a potion of sorts, every bowl a balm, and strangely it begins to affect you. You no longer ask what is in a dish, but why. What is this meant to warm, to cool, to soften? You sip a spoonful of nettle soup and wonder if it's meant for your bones, your breath, or your mood. Maybe all three. You hear tales of travelling cooks who doubled as healers, of kitchens where the line between apothecary and pantry was non-existent, and you realise, for centuries, food was the first medicine. Long before pills, people reached for broth. Before doctors, there was stew. Modern science may not agree with every belief, but the core idea remains. What you eat changes how you feel, and the people here never forgot it. As the sun sets, you're handed a slice of spiced apple tart, made with clove, sage, and a hint of rue. It's fragrant, sweet, a little bitter, like memory, a final note in a day of edible healing. You chew slowly, thinking of your own spice rack at home, mostly unused, mostly decorative. But not anymore, because now you know what they're really for, not just taste, but care. You're walking through the village square when a sudden hush falls over the crowd. A man in a dark wool tunic steps forward, carrying a small set of brass scales and a book bound in leather. Children scatter, bakers go still. Even the innkeeper lowers his eyes. This is the bread inspector, and today he's checking the loaves. It sounds absurd at first. Weighing bread, measuring flour. But as you watch him lift a coarse brown loaf, slice it clean in two, and peer at the crumb with the intensity of a priest reading scripture, you begin to understand. Bread in the medieval world was regulated by law, by guilds, and sometimes even by fear. He checks for weight, consistency, signs of fraud. Because in this time, bread is more than food. It's currency. And when bakers cheat, by adding chalk, sawdust, old flour, or simply shorting the scale, it becomes a crime against the entire community. You walk behind him, listening as he explains his duties. He works under something called the Assize of Bread, a set of rules dating back to the 13th century in many towns. It dictates exactly how much a loaf should weigh, depending on the price of wheat that season. If grain is expensive, the loaf shrinks. If grain is cheap, it grows. But no matter what, it must match the weight declared on that week's ledger. If it doesn't, the baker pays a fine, or worse. In some places, cheating bakers were publicly shamed, forced to wear stale loaves around their necks, or to stand beside the market stocks, holding up underweight bread while townsfolk mocked them. One particularly infamous punishment, being tied to a cart and dragged through the street with a sack of flour dumped over your head. You pass a bakery where a nervous apprentice watches the inspector slice their manchet loaf, fine, white, for the wealthy. It passes, barely. The relief is visible. A failed inspection could cost not just coin but reputation, and in towns with guild systems that meant everything. The inspector moves on and you're left behind with the baker, who wipes his forehead with a flour-streaked sleeve. "Never trust a dry scale," he mutters, tossing the cut manchet into a bin. It'll be turned into breadcrumbs for thickening sauces, or maybe soaked in milk for tomorrow's pudding. Nothing is wasted, not even the loaf that nearly got him fined. You ask why the scrutiny is so intense, and he looks at you like it's obvious. Because if the bread fails, the people riot. And he's not joking. In times of famine or unfair pricing, bread sparked revolts. Entire towns had risen up when the loaves were too small, too light, or vanished altogether. It wasn't just food, it was justice. Inside the bakehouse, you see just how tightly medieval bread was bound to law and survival. Guild marks are pressed into the top of each loaf, not for decoration, but for accountability. If a loaf is light, the mark tells the inspector who to punish. In larger cities, officials kept ledgers tracking each baker's output, checking for patterns of fraud or excess. And yet, even with all the rules, the bread varies. You see coarse rye loaves for the poor, speckled with bits of bran and grit. Finer manchet rounds for the gentry. Horse bread made with peas, beans, and sometimes even ground acorns, for livestock and desperate mouths alike. One woman shows you her own family's bread for Wednesdays, a mix of wheat, barley, and lentil flour. Dense, nutty, cheap, but legal, just barely. And here's the irony. Some of these strange old breads are still around. That rye loaf with a cracked top looks a lot like a rustic German Bauernbrot. That dense barley flatbread, not so different from Scandinavian crisp breads. Even modern artisan loaves with seeds and whole grains are echoes of medieval necessity. What was once imposed by poverty is now revived as health food. Back at the table, a boy crumbles yesterday's crust into soup, thickening it without flour. His mother grates another loaf into a pudding with dried fruit and honey. You sip from a bowl of ale-bread porridge, laced with herbs, and realise bread wasn't just a side dish. It was woven into every meal, every law, every life. And still today, in countries across the world, governments regulate bread prices, subsidise flour, track supply chains. Bread remains, even now, a political object, a measure of fairness, a line between stability and unrest. As you chew a final crust, you glance at the ledger the inspector left behind. It lists each baker's name, each approved weight, each note of caution. It looks, oddly, like justice baked into paper. And suddenly you realise, in the medieval world, you didn't just break bread. You measured it. You weighed it. You answered for it. The wind bites harder now. Smoke curls from every chimney. Snow crunches underfoot as you follow a cloaked figure through the trees, away from the village. You're headed toward a root cellar carved into the side of a hill. She lifts the wooden lid, and a breath of cold earth hits your face. Inside, crates of carrots, onions and turnips stacked in straw, apples wrapped in cloth, a jug of cider gone cloudy with age. This is winter's pantry, and it's modest for a reason. Because in the medieval world, you didn't eat what you wanted, you ate what you had, and what you had depended entirely on the season. You return to the village and find the market square nearly empty. No fresh greens, no berries, no milk unless a cow gave birth. The baker's table is bare, save for yesterday's rye. A fishmonger offers dried herring from last summer, stiff as wood. Everyone is smiling, but the hands are chapped and quick. No one wastes time or food. Inside a cottage, a pot of onion and barley soup simmers over the fire. That's dinner. Again. Maybe tomorrow someone will trade pickled cabbage or a hunk of smoked cheese, but no promises. Variety is a luxury of warmer months. You help peel a turnip and the woman beside you shrugs. We've eaten them for a month now, but they grow. Her tone isn't bitter, just resigned, grateful even. Spring will bring wild garlic. Summer, peas and cherries. Autumn, beans and apples. But winter? Winter is roots and hope. Even the animals know the rhythm. Chickens stop laying, cows go dry. You're told not to expect eggs until the light returns. It's not superstition, it's nature. At dinner you're served pottage again, thick with oats and dried leeks, garnished with a single pickled walnut. There's no garnish for show, it's what's left. A tangy echo of last summer. After supper, you sit by the hearth, with a mug of hot broth cradled in your hands. It's thin, just water, a hint of marrow, and a shaving of onion skin, but it's warm, and that counts for something. You watch the fire flicker against the walls and realise this season teaches restraint. In modern kitchens, you're used to options. Recipes ask you what you feel like. Salads in winter, citrus in spring, strawberries whenever you please. But here, the season decides. Your cravings don't matter. Only what's stored, salted, or still clinging to life beneath the frost. A young boy pokes the fire and tells you about Hungry Gap, the bleak window in late winter when autumn stores are nearly gone and spring's growth hasn't arrived. You nod, understanding now why everyone speaks so gently to the cook and why even a slice of dried apple is treated like treasure. In the morning, you help sort the cellar. The carrots are rubbery but salvageable. A sack of beans has sprouted. Those are tossed to the pigs. The onions, though soft, still flavour broth. This is daily triage, not just eating but managing, planning, hoping something lasts just long enough. Even mealtime changes. Portions shrink. Bowls get passed more carefully. You learn tricks. Stale bread grated into mush. Broth stretched with ale. Cabbage leaves softened with ash and salt to mimic fresh greens. And yet, there's still joy. A grandmother unwraps a cloth and reveals a small cake of honey and ground nuts, hidden since Martinmas. It's cut into tiny wedges, one per person. A celebration not because it's sweet, but because it's surprising. The feast days shine even brighter in the cold months. Not because they're elaborate, but because they interrupt the monotony. One day of stewed dried fruit feels like magic after weeks of turnips. And what's remarkable is that even now these rhythms linger. Seasonal eating has returned, not out of necessity but fashion. Farmers' markets, winter squash stews, spring greens, root-to-leaf cooking, they're echoes. Faint, yes, but real. You chew the last bite of sour beet and barley and it dawns on you. This life isn't about suffering, it's about adapting, listening to what the earth gives, accepting that hunger and patience are part of the same story. You head to bed, belly not quite full, but not empty either. The wind howls outside, the hearth glows faintly, and somewhere beneath your blanket of straw and wool, a quiet understanding settles in. To eat with the seasons isn't deprivation. It's knowing that everything has its time, even hunger, even hope. You're back in the kitchen again, sorting through a pile of dried goods when you notice something odd. A pouch marked for flour smells faintly of meat. Another bag of sugar, precious and hoarded, is stored in a box once used for salted fish. But what really catches your eye is the pot of bubbling stew on the fire. The scent is savoury, rich, and just slightly sweet. You peer inside. There's barley, onion, cabbage, and what looks like bits of animal tendon. Then you see it. Suet. Rendered beef fat. Used not just for cooking, but to bind, to thicken, to enrich. It clings to every surface. It's the foundation of flavour. A cook stirs slowly. Can't waste good fat, she says, and she means it. In this world, animal parts are used in everything, not just as main ingredients, but as building blocks. From broth to pastry, from wine to candles. You help prepare a pudding, flour, dried fruit, eggs, then a generous handful of sweet. It's kneaded into the dough like butter, not for richness, but because butter is too rare. Sweet is what most people can afford, and it keeps the bread moist for days. Later you join another cook rendering tallow from beef fat. It's thick, white, and poured into pots while still warm. It'll be used in stews, slathered on vegetables, even spread on bread like lard. A meal without fat isn't just bland, it's incomplete. You hear a story about a nobleman who once sent back a pie because the crust wasn't greasy enough. Not flaky, greasy, that's the standard here. And when times are hard, the flavour of fat is luxury. Then comes dessert, or something close to it. You're served a slice of dried apple tart, but the crust isn't made with butter. It's made with bone marrow whipped with flour and water until pliable. You hesitate, then bite, and it's delicious, earthy, silky. You'd never know you were eating the inside of a shin bone. The next dish arrives without warning, a warm drink made from wine, herbs, and something cloudy. You sip it cautiously, only to learn it's been clarified with fish bladder. That's right, isinglass, taken from the swim bladders of sturgeon and used to filter wine and beer. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, it was one of the most effective tools for clearing sediment. The woman who brewed it shrugs. Better than dirt in your cup. And once you know to look for it, you see animal parts hidden everywhere. The bread you ate this morning, whitened with ground bones or burnt horn ash, used to purify flour or bleach it for wealthier households. The cheese on your trencher, thickened with animal rennet, scraped from the stomach lining of a calf. The glue holding together that ornate kitchen ledger, boiled hooves. You're no longer surprised when you discover pork fat rubbed on apples to make them shine and preserve them longer, or when a bowl of porridge is stirred with goose grease instead of water to make it richer and more filling. None of this is wasteful. Quite the opposite. This is efficiency turned into culture. When an animal is slaughtered, every part is accounted for. Bones become broth. Blood becomes pudding. Fat becomes flavour. Skin becomes parchment. Intestines become sausage casings. And strangely, the logic still holds today. You remember reading labels on modern products. Gelatin in candy, rennet in cheese, glycerin in soaps. The legacy of medieval kitchens lingers quietly on shelves and in pantries, even if we no longer recognise the origins. The cook beside you offers a cup of milk thickened with bone marrow and flavoured with rosewater. It's meant to soothe a bad stomach. You take a sip. It's creamy, surprisingly delicate, like a memory from a life you never lived. Outside, the butcher sharpens his blade over a new delivery. He won't just carve meat. He'll render fat, clean organs, collect bones, and separate membranes for boiling. Every cut has a purpose. Every scrap a future. And it makes sense now why so many recipes from this time call for parts we now fear. Liver, heart, feet, tongue, lungs. because they were never taboo, just useful, just food. You sit near the fire as a pot of bone broth simmers beside you. The smell is deep, grounding, slightly sweet from roasted marrow. You watch the fat rise and shimmer. Nothing fancy, just centuries of quiet wisdom in a bowl. You scoop some into your cup, warmed to the bone, and you think, maybe this is what we've forgotten. That nourishment isn't always pretty, it's not always clean, but when you honour every part of what you have, you end up with something richer than taste. You end up with respect. The sun is low, casting long shadows through the cloister gardens as you approach a low stone building. The air smells faintly of roasted almonds and something sweet, maybe dates. Inside, a group of monks move quietly through the kitchen, preparing for the evening meal. One stirs a pot of thick lentil stew. Another carefully folds a cloth over a dish of mashed peas. At first glance, it looks like any other monastic kitchen. But then you notice something strange. A roast chicken, made of almonds. You lean closer. What looks like meat is actually a mock bird, crafted from almond paste, shaped into a fowl, and browned gently in the oven. No feathers, no bones, just illusion. Welcome to the deeply peculiar world of medieval fasting food, where religious rules forbade eating meat, but the appetite never quite got the message. In monasteries and pious households across Europe, strict fasting days made up nearly half the calendar year. No meat, no eggs, no dairy. But human creativity being what it is, cooks found ways to follow the letter of the law, if not quite its spirit. You're handed a slice of fish pie, except it's not fish at all. The filling is made of ground almonds, breadcrumbs, parsley and spices, moulded into the shape of a trout and glazed with beetroot juice to mimic scales. It flakes like fish, tastes vaguely like fish, but it's not. It's culinary theatre, performed in honour of the church. A monk shows you a pot of butter made from boiled almond milk and olive oil. It's creamy, spreadable, and just rich enough to fool the tongue. We eat no fat from beasts, he explained solemnly, but the Lord never said we couldn't make our own. On one table sits a round cheese, or so you think. It's actually made from pressed rice and oat milk, moulded and aged in cloth to imitate real dairy. It smells convincing. You begin to understand. In this world, abstinence inspires invention. As night settles over the monastery, the final dishes are plated, if one can call it that. On a carved wooden board lies a perfect little ham, rosy and marbled, complete with decorative cloves pressed into the top. But again, it's all a ruse. The ham is made from mashed lentils and wheat paste, dyed with wine-soaked beetroot and shaped by hand. Beside it, eggs made of ground nuts with saffron-stained centres, moulded into shells of dried turnip skin. You're not at a feast, you're at a fast-day masquerade. And the remarkable thing? No one laughs. No one thinks it's silly. This is serious business. To obey the church and still honour hospitality, monks and layfolk alike created entire menus of mock meats, mock cheeses, mock cream, all plant-based, all respectful of fasting laws, but none of it boring. You sip a warm cup of almond milk steeped with cinnamon. It's called a comforter, and was often served in place of wine on penitent days. It's simple, earthy, the kind of thing that makes you feel clean, from the inside out. Across the room, 2 novices prepare the next morning's porridge, made without butter or milk, of course. Just water, oats, a spoon of honey, and a few chopped dried figs. Even indulgence has boundaries here, but boundaries breed artistry. You've seen that again and again, and this artistry doesn't disappear with the seasons. Fast days come year-round, every Wednesday, every Friday, the entire 40 days of Lent, plus Advent, Ember Days, Rogation Days. The calendar is littered with restraint, and for the deeply devout these rules apply not just during holy times, but as a lifelong discipline. But discipline doesn't mean dullness. In the wealthiest monasteries, records speak of fast-day tables groaning with up to 50 non-meat dishes, from glazed root tarts to imitation venison made from mushrooms and wine. Some were so convincing that clergy had to double-check whether they'd accidentally broken their own rules, and some of these practices, they're still with us. Ever had almond milk, a nut-based cheese? How about mock meat made of seitan or lentils seasoned to resemble the real thing? Whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or just curious, those trends trace their ancestry to monastic kitchens. You take one last bite of your almond trout, dipped in green herb sauce, and marvel at how limitation sparked such flavour. These cooks weren't rebelling against the rules. They were rising to meet them with cleverness, reverence, and creativity. Outside, the chapel bell tolls. The meal ends with quiet prayer and satisfied stomachs. Not a scrap of meat in sight. And yet, somehow, nothing felt missing. 'Cause sometimes, in giving something up, you make room for something far more imaginative to take its place. You wake to a strange clattering sound. Outside, in the pale morning fog, a woman is pacing around the garden holding a black-feathered chicken. She pauses, squints into the light, then shakes her head. "Laid before sunrise," she mutters. "Best not eat it." She sets the egg aside on a shelf, marked untouchable. At first you think it's superstition, but then you begin to notice more. A crooked loaf from the oven is tossed to the crows. A pot bubbles over and is discarded entirely. A jug of cider is spilled. No one drinks it after that. These aren't accidents, they're omens. In the medieval kitchen, food wasn't just nourishment, it was a message board for fate, and people watched it closely. You sit at breakfast beside a pot of gruel when someone lifts a spoon and finds a hair inside. They stop eating immediately. One woman whispers a charm under her breath. Another throws salt into the fire. No one finishes the bowl. Why? Because a hair in your food wasn't just gross. It was a warning, a sign of sickness, betrayal, or ill luck on the way. Later, a man refuses a perfectly good apple because it's grown in a left-leaning branch of the orchard. Another won't eat leeks on Thursdays. A traveller insists his bread must be broken, never cut, or else his marriage will suffer. These aren't jokes. They're the hidden laws of eating, the kind you don't find in cookbooks. Some rules are regional, others deeply personal, but all share one thing in common. They're about control. In a world of disease, famine, and uncertainty, where meals are unpredictable and life fragile, people search for signs, and food provided them. You help prepare a stew of beans and dried nettle. Before serving, the cook drops a coin into the pot, stirs once clockwise, and lets it sit. It's for luck, for wealth, for fertility. The beans carry the wish, she explains. It's comforting, oddly so. This idea that your meal might hold a secret message, that your body, your future, even your soul might be shaped by what lands on your plate. As twilight creeps in, the kitchen quiets, but the superstitions don't. A child rushes in with a handful of eggs, grinning. His mother stops in mid-step. She carefully counts them, sets one aside and mutters, "Never cook in threes." You glance at the rejected egg. No cracks, no blemish. But it won't be used today. 3 of anything in a cooking pot is bad luck, she explains. It invites sickness, or worse, a death in the household. By the hearth, a kettle whistles. No one dares remove it too quickly. The steam must rise in full before the lid can be lifted. If not, it means unfinished business, troubles left unresolved. Another rule, another layer of meaning on the mundane. A man beside you breaks bread and spills a few crumbs. He sweeps them into the fire and nods solemnly. Feed the spirits under the floor, he says. You don't ask questions, not here. In this house, in this village, superstition and supper share the same seat at the table. You sip a mug of warm beer and notice a tiny spider crawling on the rim. Instinct tells you to flick it away, but the woman next to you stops your hand. Don't kill it, she warns. It's guarding your drink. She lets it crawl onto her finger and carries it to the door, whispering to it like an old friend. You blink, unsure if you're more unsettled or enchanted. There are stories too. A man who refused stew on a fasting day and died a week later. A girl who bit into the first apple of spring before offering thanks and lost her voice for a year. A baker who mocked the bread he overbaked and never rose a loaf again. The kitchen remembers, they say, and it holds grudges. Some of these ideas sound ridiculous, but when you see them acted out, day after day, with reverence, with caution, with real consequence, they begin to take root. You start stirring your porridge the right way. You leave a scrap for the mice. You never hand someone a knife directly. You don't know why, but you do it. Because in this world, meals are spells, utensils are charms, and every ingredient has a personality of its own. And it's not so far from the present. Think of the modern world's lucky foods. Grapes at New Year's, lentils for wealth, breaking wishbones, blowing out birthday candles. These aren't rational. They're rituals. We still carry them, still need them, still eat by instinct when we're honest. By the time you go to bed, you catch yourself turning the bread crust inward, just as you saw the others do. So the devil can't count your bites, someone once said. And in that moment, you're no longer pretending to live in the past. You're just living. You step into the narrow lane that runs between the tavern and the candlemaker's shop, drawn by the smell of something cooking, something greasy, hot, and oddly familiar. A low wooden cart, its wheels dark with soot, stands near the corner. Behind it, a heavy-set woman ladles steaming stew into chipped bowls, her apron stained and her voice sharp. No silver platters, no linens, just the fast, cheap heat of the street. This is medieval street food. Quick meals for workers, travellers, and those too poor or too busy to cook. And while the manor kitchens and church feasts get all the attention, it's here in the alleys, lanes and corners that most people actually ate. You step in line behind a few others, eyeing the day's options. A bowl of fish stew with floating bones and cabbage stems, a meat pie whose filling you dare not identify, and something on a stick, charred, sizzling and vaguely bird-shaped. You ask what it is. The cook grins. It was walking yesterday. You choose the pie. It's hot, flaky, and suspiciously chewy. Probably turnips. Maybe offal. Maybe worse. But it's only a penny. And most importantly, it's filling. Around you, workers from the tannery, stable hands and cart drivers eat quickly standing. There's no time to linger. These meals are made to keep you moving. A full belly for another few hours of hauling, scraping, digging, living. And yet, even here, there's pride. The woman sells her pies only hot and fresh. If one cools too long, she throws it to the dogs. Another stall offers hot wine with spices. 2 pennies, but worth it on a frozen morning. You sip some. It burns going down, but feels like fire in your chest. A boy runs past with a skewer of roasted onions and salted herring. He's barefoot, grinning, eating like a king. You're offered a plate of humble pie next, made from deer innards, leftover dough and thick gravy. It's a dish once reserved for royal huntsmen, now passed to tavern cooks and alley vendors. You take a bite. It's salty, dark, and rich. You'd never guess it was made from scraps. As the day wears on, the street grows louder. Carts clatter past. Someone haggles over a bowl of beans, and a vendor sings out prices for eel pasties with more confidence than the eels deserve. You edge toward a second stall, where a man is ladling something thick and grey from a battered cauldron. You brace yourself. Peas porridge, he says without looking up. Boiled yesterday. Boiled today. Will be boiled again tomorrow. You smile. That rhyme is still whispered in nursery songs today. But here, in front of the steaming pot, it isn't quaint. It's survival. Because street food wasn't just convenience. It was necessity. Most homes didn't have ovens. Many couldn't afford fuel for fires. So a single hot meal bought on the street meant warmth, calories, and the chance to rest your hands and jaws before working again. And despite the grime and clatter some of these dishes endure, that meat-filled pastry wrapped in paper at your favourite pub, once a survival hand pie, that fried fish with vinegar from seaside stalls, a cousin to the salted herring and onions served here by the alley's edge. Even the term fast food owes its soul to these carts, where meals were served fast, eaten faster, and paid for in pennies and paces. Back at the corner, a woman serves fried cheese curds dusted with herbs and stuffed into a hollow bread roll. It sounds luxurious, but it's peasant food, born from curdled milk, leftover dough, and cheap greens. Still, it's delicious. You burn your tongue in your hurry and no one judges. You watch two boys share a hot leek pasty, arguing over who gets the crust. A stable hand bites into a mystery pie and winces. Too much pepper. The vendor cackles. That's the flavour of honesty. And it strikes you. There's no pretense here. The food is what it is. Cheap, hot, imperfect. But somehow, honest. If the noble feast is a performance, then this is the rehearsal, the reality, the everyday. You help a vendor pack up as dusk falls. She scrapes the last of the stew into a pail. What's left will be reheated tomorrow. Maybe, if it lasts. She wraps unsold pies and cabbage leaves to keep the flies off. Nothing goes to waste. And as lanterns glow and shutters close, you realise that this is where medieval cooking truly lived. In alleys, in corners, in bowls passed hand to hand. Not in recipe books, but in scraps and steam and shared salt. So the next time you grab a sandwich from a cart, or a slice of something hot wrapped in paper, remember the fish stew, the umble pie, the peas porridge, and know you're walking in ancient footsteps. The castle hall is dim, lit by a few sputtering tallow candles and the last glow of a smoky hearth. You've been invited to sit quietly near the wall as the evening feast begins, not as a guest, but as an observer. Servants move swiftly, laying out silver platters and velvet-draped trenchers, careful not to make eye contact with the lord or his family. A roasted swan is carried in, skin lacquered, wings reattached for flair. It looks majestic. It smells off, rich, gamey, slightly sour. You watch the nobleman slice into it and take a bite, lips tightening. He doesn't finish it. A servant clears it away discreetly, and you realise something unexpected. The rich ate worse than you thought. You'd assumed the upper classes dined like kings, because, well, they were kings. But many of their foods were more about display than taste. It wasn't about satisfaction. It was about power. To eat extravagantly was to prove you could afford to waste. A second course arrives, black sauce poured over boiled capon. The sauce is made from burnt bread, vinegar, wine, and dried fruit. It's bitter, smoky, and intense. The capon is dry. No one complains. Beside you, a kitchen boy whispers, "They won't finish half of it." He's right. The peacocks, the gilded pies, the moulded jellies, they'll all be picked at and removed. They'll feed the dogs, the staff, or the pig bins, but they've done their job. They've proven excess. Then comes something even stranger. A jelly in bright red, moulded into the shape of a castle. It's made from wine, sugar, and gelatin from boiled calves' feet. Beside it, a moulded custard shaped like a hedgehog with almond spikes. These illusion dishes were culinary performances, entertainment as much as food. Whether they tasted good, that wasn't the point. You retreat into the shadows as the feast stretches on. By now, half the guests are full, the other half merely picking. A platter of spiced lamprey, an oily, eel-like fish favoured by nobility, is passed around. It glistens with a sauce of clove and cinnamon, thickened with blood and vinegar. You hear murmurs of approval, but you notice, most just nibble, then leave it. Another dish arrives, this one even stranger. A white leech, a firm jelly made from almond milk, sugar and rice flour, sliced like cheese. It tastes floral, almost medicinal. It's served beside roast goose dyed bright yellow with saffron, not for flavour, but so the colour would pop under candlelight. The combination is bewildering. Sweet jellies with greasy meat, fish with fruit, meat pies sprinkled with sugar. You find yourself longing for a bowl of barley and onions. The nobleman leans back, dabbing his lips with cloth. A servant clears away half a pie, untouched. No one notices. The food isn't meant to be eaten, it's meant to be seen. And beneath the glamour lies something darker. These grand displays were made possible by an army of unseen labour, cooks, spit boys, foragers, and kitchen scullions who worked from before dawn until long after the candles guttered. You slip into the scullery and find a girl scrubbing the roasting tray that held the peacock. She's coughing from the smoke, her hands black with grease. "That bird took 5 hours," she mutters. "No one ate it." Later that night, the leftovers are quietly sorted. The best scraps go to favoured servants. The rest, bones, crusts, cold jelly, are tossed or fed to animals. A few lucky beggars at the gate receive a plate of broken pie crust and fish bones. And you realise the aristocrats weren't eating better food, just more of it. Stranger, richer, harder to digest. It wasn't about nourishment. It was about proving they didn't have to care. You think back to the villagers, happily slurping pottage, eating off trenchers, seasoning with herbs they picked themselves. Their meals were humbler, yes, but they made sense. They fed. They warmed. Here at the high table, food had become theatre, a performance of status, and as with many performances, the truth sat quietly behind the curtain. You step out into the night, the air cold and clean. Behind you, laughter echoes from the hall, but you're already dreaming of stew. Morning returns, and with it, something unexpected. You're back in the village kitchen, helping stir a pot of turnip and bean stew, when a young woman hands you a basket of herbs. Mint, dill, parsley, fresh, green, and full of scent. You blink. It's not spring yet. Where did these come from? From the sill, she says, pointing to a narrow window ledge warmed by the hearth, and the basket under the bed. You peek under her cot and find a wooden box lined with cloth and damp moss. Tucked inside are sprigs of greens carefully wrapped in wax linen. Preserved, protected, still good, still alive. And just like that, it clicks. So many of the foods you've seen, smelled and tasted over the last weeks have survived. Not just here, but in your world. You remember the sourdough starter on your neighbour's counter, the fermented pickles in the farmer's market, the rye loaf from the artisanal bakery, the hot meat pie from the street vendor, even the lentil stew simmering on your own stovetop back home. These weren't accidents. They were echoes. You start walking through the village one last time, seeing everything differently. The trenchers, now called bread bowls. The pottage, rebranded as rustic one-pots. The vinegar-soaked onions, the basis of gourmet condiments. In the market, a woman is selling pickled walnuts, each one wrinkled and black like tiny brains. You remember seeing the same jar on a hip restaurant shelf last winter labelled Heritage Preserve. Someone once laughed at the idea, but now you get it. A boy passes you eating a slab of fried cheese stuffed in coarse bread. You could swear you saw something just like that in a food truck last month. Crispy, salty, nostalgic, survival food turned delicacy. In a corner, a cook slices liver for the day's pie. You glance away, then remember the pâté your aunt serves at holidays. You taste it now with new understanding. A poor man's trick elevated to fine dining. All around you, the strange food habits of the past aren't gone. They've adapted, rebranded, returned, often dressed up in language and luxury, but still carrying the bones of their origin. And not just the food, the rhythm, the reasons. Fermentation for the gut, root vegetables in winter, eggs only when the chickens lay, rich food only on feast days. Your modern habits owe more to this world than you ever guessed. The wind picks up again as you pass the last row of houses. Somewhere nearby, a pot clangs. You hear a rooster complain. The smell of wood smoke clings to everything, but under it lingers rosemary, and maybe garlic? You smile. The idea that medieval folk didn't season their food has always been wrong. They just used what they had, what grew nearby, what could be dried, smoked, or brined. Their habits were rooted in rhythm, in scarcity, in the quiet brilliance of making something from nothing. And you realize we're still doing that. The Sunday stews, the family dumpling recipes, the hand-me-down spice blends with no written recipe, just instinct. A grandmother's pickle jar, a father's sour soup. Even the way you save bones for broth, it's not new, it's old. Older than books, older than forks. You think back to the roasted beets with vinegar at that trendy restaurant. Or the way people now drizzle honey on cheese. The bone marrow served on toast, sold at a price that would have made a medieval cook faint. The bread with seeds and grains they once called peasant loaves, now artisanal, now precious. And you laugh softly, because the irony is delicious. What once fed the desperate now feeds the fashionable. The cycle turns. But the core of it, the ingenuity, the earthiness, the survival, it never left. Even our rituals are echoes. The big feast on Sunday, the fasting on Fridays, the winter stores, the spring cleanse that just happens to match the leanest time of the farming calendar. Coincidence? Hardly. You sit once more by the fire. The stew is bubbling. The bread has cooled. Someone brings a slab of cheese, sharp and firm, and breaks it with a knife shaped like a fish. They pass you a bowl, and you eat. And in that moment, between the steam, the salt, the comfort, you feel it. A thread pulled tight across centuries, binding you not just to history but to everyone who's ever scraped, chopped, stirred, and hoped the pot would last till morning. And now the fire is low, the bowls are empty, the air smells faintly of ashen time. You sit back, full not just of food, but of memory, of quiet admiration, of wonder at how something as simple as a bite to eat can carry 1,000 years inside it. From eel pies to sour stews, bread trenchers to sweetmeats, every strange medieval habit whispered its way into your world, sometimes dressed in silk, sometimes just hiding under a new name. You imagine a woman bent over a hearth centuries ago, rubbing herbs between her fingers, stirring with care, not for luxury, for love, for necessity. That same spirit lingers in your kitchen today. So the next time you eat something warm and strange, something sharp or sour or slow-cooked, pause, taste deeply, let it carry you back. You're not so far from them, really. The past is never gone, it simmers. Let that thought keep you company tonight. Let the scent of barley and garlic, of smoke and mint settle softly in your dreams. Sleep full, sleep warm.